Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Nesaretnam, and I'm the Deputy Chair of Climate Governance Malaysia, CGM. We are delighted at the overwhelming response we have had, and I believe this is due to the eminent speakers we are showcasing today. And of course, palm oil is always a hot topic. I'm sure you're looking forward to hearing their presentations, but please allow me to say a few words about the webinar and who we are. CGM is a World Economic Forum initiative. We are proud to be the second country chapter to be recognized. Our mission is to target non-executive directors of boards to address and discuss climate risks and to ensure companies reduce their carbon footprint. Decisions made at the board can have a major impact on addressing climate change, as corporations are responsible for generating most of the emissions. Ultimately, we would like to address the current climate emergency and the Paris Agreement of keeping temperatures below 2 degrees centigrade and as close to 1.5 degrees as possible. Marc, the former governor of the Bank of England, said recently, I think this was just 3 weeks ago, that the world is heading for mortality rates equivalent to the COVID crisis every year by mid-century, unless we take action now. Today's webinar is of a personal interest to me, having been involved with the palm oil industry for over 30 years. I've always been passionate about palm oil, especially seeing the tremendous growth in its sustainability practices over the last 20 years. Despite the progress, we are constantly under scrutiny and sometimes bullied because Malaysia and Indonesia are deemed third world producers. I believe we should look at this positively and continue to strive and transform the industry to one that all of us and our future generations can be proud of. Whilst many have embraced RSPO and the mandatory MSPO, we still have some who have failed to do so. We hope this webinar will persuade them to do the right thing. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2020, crude palm oil prices hit a 9-year high, and yet this was not reflected in the share price of listed palm oil companies. Analysts believe that investors are now looking for companies who are ESG compliant. Therefore, in the interest of shareholders, palm oil companies need to be ESG compliant and also move from sustainability to climate action. Big investors like BlackRock have urged companies to maintain their focus on reducing carbon emissions amid growing concerns of an economic fallout from global warming. In December, we saw BlackRock voting against the re-election of independent directors of Top Glove at their AGM. The move was ESG driven, as BlackRock held the independent directors accountable for the lack of care on labor issues. I think this was a clear signal and warning to independent directors. The next challenge facing directors may well be climate accountability and biodiversity loss. Another more significant development is the recent declaration by EPF that it aims to make all its investments based on ESG practices by 2030. So EPF may no longer invest in non-ESG compliant companies, including oil and gas. Partly in response to investor and customer pressure, businesses have begun making so-called net zero commitments, pledging to cut or offset emissions by taking an equivalent amount out of the atmosphere through carbon capture and other technologies. The good news is that more companies in Malaysia are beginning to embark on their ESG journey. I am on the steering committee of the CEO's Action Network that was launched in 2019, and I'm happy to report that over 40 industry captains have come together to adopt best ESG practices. Ladies and gentlemen, companies in the future may also be faced with enduring a carbon tax on goods exported to certain countries. Many countries are pushing ahead with climate ambitions and as a consequence, proposing to penalize imports. The EU, for example, wants to ensure that imported goods face the same costs of emissions as European companies. A carbon border tax would penalize dirty imports from countries that lag behind in fighting climate change. We believe that other countries will be following suit. Malaysian companies need to be forewarned and start reducing their carbon footprint or may find themselves left out of world trade. On the 5th of May, CGM is organizing a webinar with a few ambassadors to understand the climate ambitions of their countries. For those of you who are exporting overseas, please do join us. So what can companies do to reduce their carbon footprint? As a first step, companies should measure and disclose 4 key areas: GHG emissions, transitioning to renewable energy, water use, and waste management. Whilst we are doing everything possible to reduce our footprint, it is also important to capture the existing GHG emissions. Forests in Malaysia are a very good carbon sink. I know some companies are already doing this, but we need more serious commitment. Incidentally, New Zealand is the first country to make climate change reporting mandatory. I believe Bursa is also studying this and looking at how this can be adopted in Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, last August, CGM ran a survey of company directors of public listed companies and senior management. There was an overwhelming demand for the type of content which CGM intends to provide on climate change. This includes information for boards to make fully informed decisions about business strategy, future allocation of capital, how to smoothly transition from brown businesses and insights into green opportunities. CGM is also working with the Academy of Sciences Malaysia to provide data to companies on what a 1.5 degree Malaysia will look like so they can take the necessary mitigation steps to prepare for this eventuality. So please do join us at CGM so we can work together to achieve our climate ambitions. As we all know, we have no planet B. So ladies and gentlemen, with that, I have now great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dato Ravi Muthayah, the Secretary General of the Ministry of Plantation Industries and Commodities. Please welcome Dato Ravi.
Yang berusaha Dr. Kalanithi Nesaretnam, Co-Founder, Climate Governance Malaysia. Yang Mulia Tunku Dr. Alina Alias, Council Member, Climate Governance Malaysia. Honored panelists, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and salam sejahtera. Firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to record my appreciation to the Climate Governance Malaysia, CGM, for the kind invitation to officiate the webinar entitled Progressing from Sustainability to Climate Action in the Palm Oil Sector. It gives me great pleasure to extend a cordial welcome to everyone joining us at this seminar. This virtual edition of the seminar is just one of the many innovative ways the CGM has used to reach out to a global audience in this challenging time when travel and physical meetings are curtailed due to the global pandemic. I was made to understand that CGM was launched in May 2019, which is the first country in Asia and second country in the world to set up the World Economic Forum's Climate Governance Initiative, CGI. The CGI is an effort to reach out specifically to non-executive directors, NEDs, of the listed company boards to inform, engage with, and develop responses on how businesses might address longer-term risks of climate change, including a more sustainable allocation of capital. CGM, since its inception, has played an active role in organizing over 50 events, raising awareness of the financial risks of climate change. Given the importance of the initiatives, it is my earnest hope that CGM will continue to play a key role to enable the NEDs to gain climate awareness and skills, and most importantly, embed climate considerations into board decision making. Gathered here today, participants from a cross-section of palm oil and allied industries, both in the form of panelists and delegates, and I believe this will allow us to get insights from renowned experts on the climate change crisis, as well as the impact and opportunities for the palm oil industry. Ladies and gentlemen, the palm oil industry is a very important industry for Malaysia, which generated export earnings of 73.25 billion in 2020. Malaysia produced more than 19.14 million metric tons of crude palm oil from a planted area of 5.87 million hectares in 2020. The palm oil industry is the largest agricultural contributor to Malaysia's gross domestic product, around 3.6% in 2020, including generating employment opportunities for decades and reducing the level of rural poverty in Malaysia. Malaysia's commitment towards sustainability and climate action can be traced way back to 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit, where we have pledged to maintain at least 50% of our landmass under forest cover. Today in 2021, almost 3 decades, I am proud to say that we have renegade on that pledge. The latest figures reported around 55% of Malaysia's 33 hectares land area is under forest cover, exceeding Malaysia's initial pledge at the Rio Earth Summit. According to the State of the World's Forest 2020, published by Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, forests cover 31% of the global land areas. At this percentage, we Malaysians are doing fairly well on climate change and preserving biodiversity. Balancing the sustainable pillars require the adoption of pragmatic, progressive and sustainable development approaches. In this context, Malaysia, especially in the palm oil industry, firmly upholds its commitment to supply certified sustainable palm oil (CSPO) to the world, while voluntarily adopting internationally accredited sustainability standards. In addition, Malaysia has mandated the certification of its entire palm oil supply chain by January 2020 through the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil MSPO certification. As of 1st March 2021, 86.39% or 5.07 million hectares out of the 5.8 million hectares palm area and 96.04% or 437 out of 455 mills have been certified with MSPO. This mandatory certification scheme is in line with the 5 pillars of sustainability, which are people, planet, prosperity, peace and partnership under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs), and is now undergoing a review to further improve the standards. The review is undertaken openly and transparently, allowing stakeholders to give their inputs as well as for the public to provide feedback and comments at various stages. Malaysia is also committed to adopt policies which will help reverse the alarming trend of environmental degradation. For that, the government of Malaysia has formulated a series of green-friendly policies for the palm oil sector, and among other are to cap the total palm oil cultivated area to 6.5 million hectares and to stop new planting of oil palm in the new peatland areas, and to further strengthen regulations with regard to existing oil palm cultivation on peat, to ban the conversion of forest reserved areas for oil palm cultivation, and finally we pledge to make oil palm plantation maps available for public access. All these efforts will serve as an assurance to our commitment and seriousness in proving that Malaysia palm oil industry is sustainable and climate resilient, adhering to the requirements of international and national standards, and using transparency as a tool to fight against the unfair negative anti-palm oil campaign. The Malaysian government is also committed to increase the usage of blended biodiesel from 10% to 20% in the transport sector for a cleaner and healthier environment. Over the next few decades, in the pursuit of sustainability and upholding the nation's commitment towards green approaches, Malaysia is working towards a higher percentage of the palm biodiesel blend. Ladies and gentlemen, the sustainability practices of palm oil industry goes beyond the production of palm oil, in which measures have been put in place to capture biogas from palm oil effluent, POME. Harnessing biogas can reduce the carbon footprint as well as improve the sustainable development of the palm oil industry. According to the study done by MPOB in 2017, a projected GHG emission of 18 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per annum could be mitigated. As of December 2020, a total of 130 biogas plants have been installed in oil palm mills across Malaysia. Moving forward, it is also pertinent for the palm oil industry to look into the abundance of bio-waste that have high potential to be utilized and commercialized into high value-added products. By adopting the circular economy concept, such waste can be exploited at the optimum level, which not only contributes in generating more income and potential export of palm biogas products, but also lowering the GHG emission. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to say that the oil palm plantations in Malaysia have been actively embraced the sustainability practices and undertake climate change mitigation proactively and positively despite the global environmental criticism from pressure groups, green consumerisms, NGOs, and the increasingly stringent sustainability criteria of the importing countries. Concerted efforts are being directed towards a sustainable industry, including the conservation of the environment, biodiversity, and reducing GHG. In this regard, Ministry of Plantation Industries and Commodities MPIC, through the Malaysian Palm Oil Council MPOC, has established the Malaysian Palm Oil Green Conservation Foundation MPOGCF as yet another climate action under Goal 13 SDG to support conservation activities and reflect our commitment towards conserving our environment. Pursuant to that, MPIC has committed to plant 1 million forest trees species within the next 10 years, particularly in degraded lands in Sabah, as well as few other projects in protecting the wildlife population, which the projects will be sponsored primarily by the palm oil industry players. As such, we welcome and open for any kind of collaboration with state governments, private sector, as well as NGOs in enriching such initiative to be conducted in the future. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that this webinar will continue to provide a platform for global networking on the efforts and information sharing, foster closer relations and cooperation between all industry players in our pursuit to continuously undertake climate change mitigation and adaptation measures. With continuous support, cooperation, as well as commitment from all stakeholders, we can craft a better and greener future together. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to declare the launching of the webinar entitled Progressing from Sustainability to Climate Action in the Palm Oil Sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Datuk Ravi Muthayah, for so clearly setting out the Malaysian government's commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals and sharing the palm oil industry's efforts in sustainability. My name is Alina, and I am a council member of Climate Governance Malaysia, and I welcome all of you to this webinar. Sustainability, most often referred to by businesses in terms of EESG, is today understood as being able to deliver financial and societal value in a way that does not create harm to the environment. The environment, E of ESG, in its totality, is the climate and the natural capital resources that are our biosphere, novel entities, biogeochemical flows, oceans, land systems, freshwater, stratosphere, and atmosphere. If you can, think of each of these systems as interlinked and act in balance to each other. After so many years of humans having taken environmental factors as a free resource, they are now in danger of being depleted or compromised to such an extent that will change the temperature of this planet upwards by at least 1.5 degrees C, and thus making life for humans unbearable. We are only now beginning to take steps to halt this. I don't know if it's too late, but we have no choice but to try. Businesses are now asked to operate as problem solvers and not as contributors to the problem. It is a collective responsibility that we have to discharge. Turning to the palm oil sector, it is important to remember that this industry provides a product that is efficiently produced, accessibly priced to a large number of people in the developing world, and, if used responsibly, is a safe and nutritious food source for many. In addition, it is an adaptable and versatile product that is also used in many of our homes. It has helped to raise hundreds of thousands of households out of poverty since the 1960s. All that is not without cost. This industry is one of the earliest actors in the sustainability landscape and continues to be under pressure to evolving market demands. It has to meet increasing societal expectations in order to maintain its legitimacy. Palm oil producers are located in many countries other than Malaysia, including Indonesia, Thailand, Papua New Guinea, Colombia, Ecuador, Guatemala, and Nigeria. It also consists of large, medium, and small producers, including both organized and independent smallholders. In addition to plantations, there are within its value chain dealers, traders, millers, refineries, specialty fats, and oleochemicals producers. Each is unique, and climate action or response will differ one to the other. In the following panel discussion, we hope to offer you the experiences of 4 knowledgeable and experienced practitioners of sustainability with a menu of responses that your business might choose from. I would like to invite our audience to participate in the conversation by typing your questions in the Q&A box. Do tell us your name and where you're from as well. With me are Mr. Juan Aranols, CEO of Nestle Malaysia Berhad, and the region head of Nestle Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei, Datuk Yeow Chor, Group Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of IOI Corporation Berhad, Dr. Marc Ancrenaz, Scientific Director and Co-founder of Hutan and the Pongo Alliance, and Dr. Yatela Zainal, CEO of Yayasan Sime Darby. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
So let's begin from the perspective of the consumer. And I'd like to invite Mr. Juan Aranols, who will share with us from the lens of Nestle Malaysia Berhad. And just in case audience don't already know, their tagline is good food, good life. So I believe that this is a brand promise and is a corporate purpose, which is the keystone to Nestle Malaysia's sustainability initiative. So Juan, can you share Nestle's net zero GHG emissions by 2050 initiative? And in the context of your commitment to achieve 100% responsibly sourced palm oil. So what does that mean to Nestle, and what tools are being used to ensure that you can attain that commitment?
Thank you, Alina. And let me start by saying that it's a great pleasure to be part of this webinar. Supply chain sustainability is really a very important element on our overall strategy and ambition to achieve zero net carbon emissions by 2050. Palm oil is a very important ingredient in our supply chain. I think that the reasons why palm oil plays such an important role have been well explained by Dr. Kala, but also is an important contributor to our global carbon footprint. Actually, Nestle global emissions are around 92 million tons of CO2 per year, and palm oil probably contributes close to 2 million, no, 1.9 million for the precision. Actually, I would like to start by recognizing the effort that has been done. I mean, there has been a lot of work done for many years, but clearly the work needs to continue because we have no choice. No, the pressure of climate change and the impact it has in so many different areas of life, it's becoming more evident day by day, and we clearly need to step up our action. So for years, we have been engaged in many activities also conjointly with our palm oil suppliers. In terms of what we are doing, I think that there are several dimensions when it comes to sustainability. Clearly, there is one important element of traceability and monitoring. I think that we are committed to ensure 100% of our palm oil is coming from certified sources by 2023, and that's a global commitment. And clearly that requires to have an ability of tracking that this is indeed happening. No, we have Project Starling, which is a partnership with Arbus and the Earthworm Foundation, which basically allows to track large areas of land and see what is happening in terms of palm oil plantations impact in terms of the deforestation around the palm farming areas, so I can refer to that later. We are very engaged in reforestation, and actually Malaysia is quite a pioneering country inside the Nestle world. We started many years ago, and that was a big engagement with palm oil suppliers, with Darby. We started with Project Relief 10 years ago, planting trees along the Kinabatangan River in Sabah. We completed 1 million trees planted in September 2020. And some of you may remember that we have renewed our commitment by launching this objective that was highlighted in the introductory video of planting another 3 million trees in the next 3 years. And clearly that will continue building on partnerships with the palm oil industry for some part of this objective. There are other dimensions in sustainability that are important, and when we talk of the Sustainable Development Goals, we cannot forget those related to human rights. That dimension is very important, also because it contributes to the overall image and perception of the industry. From our side, clearly, we look at our partners to ensure that any kind of abuse of labor rights is concluded, is ended. So especially when it comes to foreign workers that very often are in very fragile legal conditions here in Malaysia. So I think that's important. Clearly, the second dimension has to do with child labor. Child labor has no room in our supply chain. And I think it is very important that children living in plantations areas have ensured access to healthcare, to education, and that they are not engaging in activities that may hamper their physical or intellectual development or put them at risk. In the context of COVID, maybe I can mention that I think it's very important, even though the situation is improving, that all those involved in palm oil farming continue to take care of the safety of the workforce, that they adhere rigorously to the SOPs and other practices to contain the virus spread. We have seen, I can share that we had some hiccups a few weeks back throughout this situation. They were happily solved without interrupting our supply chain, but clearly that's still an important area of alert. And then maybe I could talk a little bit from what you highlighted, no, the perception. I think that what we need to recognize is that there is a little bit of still a bit of a negative perception on what palm oil is about in some parts of the world. I share to some extent the frustration that many of you may have, because I know that it's been largely in misconceptions, but it reflects the need for the industry as a whole to do a better advocacy, especially in the Western countries where maybe the history or the stories around wildlife protection resonate a lot with consumers, and that is fine. But what does not come through is this element that is very important, which is how many million families make a livelihood out of palm oil cultivation. So I think that collectively, and from the Nestle side, we are willing to participate in this advocacy effort, knowing that still consumers in some parts of the world have this negative perception. So I think that there is a story that has to be better told, and we need to find ways to change the minds, also to dispel some notions that are extended on the nutritional value of palm oil. I mean, those of us more directly involved in this topic, we know that palm oil is a highly nutritious kind of edible oil, as good as any alternative, extremely efficient in terms of food manufacturing, food preservation, and a number of other properties. And I think that that's a story that still needs to find a better way forward. Maybe I will stop here. I know that there might be more questions throughout the panel, so I will just allow time for my colleagues.
Wow. Wow, Juan, you packed so much in the past 7 minutes. That's amazing. You talked about identifying your carbon emissions in your supply chain. You talked about engagement with your suppliers. You talked about your dimensions in sustainability, especially on the traceability and monitoring, and your emphasis on no deforestation and planting trees in your Really project. You talk about the SDGs, and then you talk about especially particularly human rights and child rights, which is forefront today. And then again about perception and to tell the right stories, and finally about emphasizing the nutritional value of palm oil, because you mentioned it's an important ingredient in your product. So yeah, you've really brought out a lot of stuff for us to talk about in the past 7 minutes. So I'd like to ask our other panelists what their thoughts are on any of these matters that Juan has mentioned, if they might have some perceptions on their part. So please, Dr. Yatela or Dr. Marc or Datuk Lee, if you have anything to contribute on this aspect.
Maybe I can start first.
Yes, of course.
Juan talked about engagement with the suppliers, and he has engaged with Sime Darby, a large supplier, and we have collaborated together in order to plant trees together in the Kinabatangan all this while. So he walks the talk. And I think we are looking at maybe a potential thing with the other relief going forward.
Yeah, we look forward to that.
That's amazing. So if there are no other questions, I do have a question now. Sime Darby, Dr. Yatela, you are with Sime Darby, Yayasan Sime Darby, and that is a philanthropic arm for very large companies. So how about smaller producers? Juan, will you be able to share how Nestle can engage with the smaller producers?
Yeah, so for sure we do it. We have a strong presence on the ground. We have also an agricultural service unit that works closely with the suppliers, where procurement teams also are very engaged in this activity. And basically what we try to foster is a constant dialogue. Sometimes it's about know-how, about practices that help the smallholders to increase the yield of their activities so that they can improve their productivity, and so that way also raise their income and their livelihood. Sometimes it's also about, out of these monitoring activities, clearly we have an understanding of where the problems may be, no, in terms of, you know, deforestation specifically, and clearly we, you know, try to always have a dialogue with our suppliers to make sure that take action. Most of the times this lead to corrective plans that are implemented and we are monitoring regularly. So I would say these are probably the two main dimensions.
Yeah, I love that you use your engagement sessions as a two-way, because you learn from your partners as well, and they learn from you. They have the ability to learn from you. So that's really fantastic. I'd like at this point to ask Datuk Lee pertaining to IOI's Climate Change Action Initiative. Now, IOI Corporation Berhad is a vertically integrated oil palm conglomerate. Datuk Lee, would you be able to share with us IOI's Climate Change Action Initiative journey, identifying where in your value chain you find the most effect in terms of GHG reduction?
Sure, Tunku, Alina. So I think firstly, I would like to say that for IOI or for any oil palm growers, climate change action is more than just a public good or corporate good. For us, actually, climate change affects the viability of the business. And that's because when there's drought or when there's flood, the effect on the palm oil yield can be between 10 to 15%. So, and also in terms of its effect, it is not something, climate change is not something that is in the medium or long term. In fact, it has really affected the palm oil industry for the last 1 or 2 decades. IOI launched a climate change action initiative last year. But in actual fact, the journey has already begun more than 15 years ago when we joined the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. Many of the criteria relating to RSPO actually relates to GHG emission reduction. For example, the no deforestation, preserving the high conservation value area, and now the high carbon stock areas, no peatland planting. These are all relating to GHG reduction. For IOI, our climate change action initiative target is to reduce the carbon intensity of our economic output by 40% in the year 2025. When measured against the baseline of 2015, that means over a period of 10 years. So already last year, 2020, 5 years down the road, we measured our carbon intensity, and we estimated that we are already about halfway through that target, meaning we have managed to reduce by 20% from the 2015 levels. So how do we do that? So on the plantation side, of course, there's the usual way of reducing the use of inputs such as fertilizer or agrochemicals, water conservation. But also another important initiative is by aggressively replanting our aged palms, which are of low yield, with high oil yielding materials. So we have done that very aggressively in terms of replanting since 6 years ago, and this is having the effect of increasing our yield and therefore reducing the carbon intensity of per unit volume of palm oil that we produce. And another important effort that we are doing also is to intensify the utilization of byproducts into green products, as well as converting our waste into green energy. So more than 70% of the palm oil fruits actually eventually become byproducts. Only about close to 30% are oil and kernel that is being used commercially nowadays. But the byproducts such as the empty fruit bunch fiber, the kernel shell, can all be converted into other use. For example, for pulp and paper, and for, of course, as the burning material for energy. effluent from our palm oil mill also, just now we have heard from the Secretary General of the Ministry, also can be converted. The biogas from the effluent can be converted into power, and which is of course green power, and can be used for the mill and the housing complexes, or can be exported to the power grid. So, and this effect can be very significant because firstly, you reduce the GHG emission from byproducts because this methane or the decomposition can create the GHG. But at the same time, one actually also achieve GHG savings by converting these byproducts or waste into green products. Now IY is an integrated palm oil player having the downstream processing. So in the downstream processing, we also put a lot of focus on energy efficiency, water conservation, waste reduction, and also clean energy. Last week, one of our oleochemical businesses, I'm glad to report, was awarded the Prime Minister's Green Hibiscus Award, which is the country's highest award for environmental performance for any manufacturing business. Finally, I want to make a point in that oil palm growing is itself a carbon capture activity. Among all the vegetable oil crops, palm oil is the only perennial crop as compared to an annual crop. That means actually we are planting an oil palm tree that can last for 25 to 30 years. And we know about, because when you study science, we know all about the photosynthesis properties, behavior of a tree. Namely, they absorb carbon dioxide and sunlight to make food in the daytime, and at night they emit oxygen. So IY, our 200,000 hectares has 30 million trees in effect. And so we are lucky in that we don't need to, tree planting is really integral to our business activity. So we don't really need to plant trees as a separate activity to offset our carbon footprint, which of course is important. So in our climate change action initiative, when we set the target, we have not actually considered the effect of this carbon capture property of our oil palm trees yet. So I hope that in time to come, when we have more solid data, this can be added as part of our target for our climate change action initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato Lee. First of all, congratulations on the Prime Minister's Hibiscus Award. That's a very, very, very important award, and IOI has done so well. So again, congratulations. I am so impressed by IOI's climate change initiatives. I mean, firstly, you have a target, you actually have a target, and that's amazing, to reduce carbon intensity by 40% by 2025, which is very aggressive as compared to 2015. That's all just within 10 years. So that's fantastic. And I think it's very important to note that you actually measure, you actually measure and therefore have a target by which you can achieve from your base year. You also noted the impact of climate change is immediate. It's so important to the viability of the business that it can impact your yields, I believe, by 10 to 15%. And you said that climate change has been felt by the industry already in the past 10 to 20 years, essentially. So it's not something in the future for you. It's today. It's immediate. And you've taken both mitigation as well as adaptation responses. So of course, your mitigation, you mentioned that, you're careful with your fertilizer and your water conservation and your replanting to your high yielding varieties. And also, you mentioned the circular economy, something that Dato Ravi also mentioned, whereby you reutilize waste, for example, the effluent to biogas. So it's both mitigation and adaptation measures that IOI has taken. So one question that I have is, and perhaps the other panelists might also be able to chip in, is, again, my question is for a big integrated player like IOI. They have the resources to undertake this type of initiatives. Would you have any suggestions for smaller players and smaller companies or even smallholders?
I think first of all, I have to say that the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil certification scheme actually is a nationwide scheme that that stipulates all the growers, including smallholders, to comply with the criteria of the MSPO. So earlier on, the Secretary General mentioned that we managed to achieve 87% of among all the growers that obtained the MSPO certification. That those that are not, the balance are all from smallholders. So in effect, all the I would say the major, the medium-sized players have all, and a large portion of the smallholders have all obtained the MSPO certification. And that's I would say a good testament of the sustainability achievements of the oil palm growers. Now, for these others, the rest of the smallholders, because we have been encouraged by the government to adopt some of the smallholders that are growing the palms around our area. And actually, there's a mutual benefit because we also take the crops from these surrounding smallholders into our oil palm mills. So we have been, I know quite a number of companies, including ourselves. We have sort of organized the palm oil suppliers as the smallholders as well as the growers into our scheme, where we, because what do we do? So we share our experience of how to comply with sustainability criteria, and then we also teach them how to increase their yield and achieve the sustainability credentials or targets at the same time. Sometimes we provide some formal help on the palm oil, the seedling, on the materials as well. So these are the ways that the large size or medium sized companies can help the smallholders to also achieve the standard and bring up the baseline of the sustainability achievement of the industry.
Thank you very much, Dato. I mean, it's very heartening to hear that conglomerates and huge companies like IOI and Nestle partnering with small producers to assist them to achieve sustainability even within their own sphere. Now, I can't help it. My next question might be a little cheeky. But I just simply couldn't leave it hanging because your last comment was looking into the carbon capture aspects of oil palm plants because it is a perennial crop and they are therefore trees. So I'm sure there are different views as to this. What I'd like to do is, I mean, this will be an ongoing debate or discussion, but I'd like to hear from our other three panelists, just very briefly, your views on this idea that oil palms are themselves carbon captures.
I can comment maybe. I think it's true. I mean, we cannot deny that, no? But clearly there is also an element of protecting biodiversity, no? One, for instance, the project relief that we have mentioned is about replanting local species that fit well into the ecosystem, into the natural ecosystems, and can also provide, you know, the foods needed for the wildlife to thrive. No, I think that we need a balance. Of course, it's undeniable. No, palm oil in itself, it's a big tree that absorbs carbon. But I think that what we need is to find this balance. We know that monocrops have also a number of side effects, no, in ecosystems. So I think that it's very important, and I think the Secretary General mentioned about it, the importance of protecting the forest areas around palm oils, because that can bring that balance, no? But of course, I fully agree, we cannot deny it, no? Palm oil farm is a very green place, but I think this element of biodiversity needs to be also very protected, especially in a country like Malaysia with over 8,000 local species, no, of any kind. That's a huge wealth that must be preserved for future generations.
Yes, thank you, Juan. Yes, it does fall into the bigger discussion between monoculture and polyculture, isn't it? So what I'll do is I'll flow directly to Dr. Marc Ancrenaz. Marc, we know how palm oil production is dependent on the weather, and the impact can be positive or negative depending on the timing for flowering and fruiting. Unfortunately, the weather has become more frequently extreme and erratic. And orangutans are considered as a keystone species. Can you share your work and your philosophy at Hutan? And in the process, explain how orangutan disappearance from the landscape can signal the disappearance of other smaller animals and plants from the ecosystem? And what, to your mind, is the significance of this? And how instead their presence might benefit the environment and agriculture?
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Before I switch to the orangutan, I would like to answer the couple of questions that we discussed earlier. Okay, let's call a tree a tree. A palm is not a tree, technically speaking, it's a grass. And it's true that palms are catching more carbon than annual crops. Only problem is that every 30 years, we chop down the palms, isn't it? So if we think about carbon sequestration, and the forest, the natural forest, is by far the best option. We have to acknowledge the problem that we have with this industry. I mean, locally in Malaysia, Indonesia, the palm oil industry has been responsible for a lot of deforestation in the past. But now we also need to look at the global situation. If we consider that half of the land where people live is planted for agriculture, and if we look at the part that is allocated for palm oil, it's tiny. It's just 1% or even less. So most of this land used for agriculture is for dairy and meat. So it's not really used for palm oil. So globally speaking, this palm oil industry hasn't a large impact for climate change. The problem though, and we know more and more that this is the case, it's that the agricultural intensification results in soil depletion, water issues, loss of diversity, and climate change. So the solution here is to really diversify our crops. It's really to plant trees within the crops. I mean, to move to agroforestry practices. And here the palm oil industry has a lot to show or to do. You were asking me about the orangutan. So our research show a few things in Sabah. First of all, the orangutan are very resilient. They are able to survive in places where you don't expect them. They are not necessarily a good indicator for biodiversity as such, but in cases where the orangutan is gone, this means that nearly all the other species will be gone too, because as I said, orangutan is super resilient. So if orangutan cannot survive, a lot of other species won't be able to survive. When we lose biodiversity as such, it's a big issue in terms of ecosystem services, because you lose your pollinator, you lose your fauna that is responsible for healthy water, healthy soils, and so forth. So there is a domino effect, if you want. And this in itself is going to impact the productivity of your palms, of your crop, whatever crop it is. So it's super important to actually maintain these ecosystem services, to maintain biodiversity. And linking this to climate change go through planting trees, as I said just now. We need to have a more diverse landscape, a landscape where you have more trees. And these trees themselves will have an impact locally on the local climate, because of course, when you have trees, you have evapotranspiration. So you have a lowering of the humidity. You have more humidity and lowering of the temperature, And this evapotranspiration in itself is going to really support the production of the palm. As Datuk Leo said earlier, we know that if the weather becomes drier and drier, hotter and hotter, the palm productivity is going to go down. So it's really important to plant trees and to recreate corridors of forest or patches of forest in those places where you have only palms as far as you can see. So to me, developing mosaic landscape is essential for the industry itself. It will also be super helpful for the orangutan. You were asking me about the orangutan. So what I said just now is that orangutan can adjust to these new landscapes. We still don't know if they are able to survive for centuries in these palm oil estates, but what we have seen is that a lot of these animals are surviving in this landscape as long as you have forest patches. So if we think about this species, there are two things. First, we need to protect as much forest as we can, because of course, orangutan needs the forest anyway to survive. And in those areas that are used for agriculture, palm oil or rubber or other crops, we need to improve our management practices. We need to restore natural forest, and we need, of course, to give a chance to these animals. We need to live peacefully with them, if you want. We can recreate a proper, suitable habitat for the orangutan, but if people kill them or remove them, translocate them, we will lose them as well. At the end of the day, I remain hopeful for species like the orangutan because, as I said earlier, they are resilient. Now the problem is of course with other species that really depend on the forest, like gibbons or other species that will have a lot more problems to adjust to this new landscape. But for the sake of people and wildlife, I think that moving toward agroforestry, toward more diversified landscape will go a long way.
Thank you, Marc. That's very interesting on your point pertaining to the orangutan being very resilient. And what you're saying is that because they're resilient, if they are gone, it also means there are a lot of other species, flora and fauna that's also gone. And when that's gone, our biodiversity is gone. How that impacts us as human beings is what you said, is that then the ecosystem services is not there. And ecosystem services, from what I hear from you, is important because it creates the right environment for agriculture, for humans to live. And in this sense, your view is that biodiversity does contribute to the productivity of plantations, and it does support the production of palm. And you mentioned the term mosaic landscape. Will you be able to elaborate a bit more what you mean by mosaic landscape?
More and more research shows that if you have what we call intensified agriculture, industrial agriculture with only one type of crop, this is when problems happen, because this type of case cannot really sustain biodiversity, so you lose the services. When we speak about mosaic landscapes, we speak about a landscape where you have a lot of diversified types of habitats, if you want. So you would have crops, palm oil here, or patches of rubber, patches of different crops, all integrated with natural forest. And the kind of landscape that we used to have in the past, long ago, before the mechanized area. So of course, after World War II, we needed to produce all of this food for the growing population. Now we realize 50 years down the road that this has a very bad impact on the soil health, for example. So we need to come back to our sources. We need to really recreate this mosaic habitat where you have a diversification of crops. And this will benefit not only the biodiversity I'm interested in, this will benefit as well people and the climate when we understand how important are trees to sustain climate.
I am curious whether you have successfully been able to to establish a mosaic landscape within a plantation area, and whether if one were a smallholder with a very small area, but you're located in an area where there is wildlife, how can you go about doing something like this if you are just a smallholder? Would you have any views on this?
Yeah, this is a little bit what we discussed earlier. Actually, everybody can be part of the solution, but we have to look at the landscape level. Let's say if we want to secure 20% of the land under natural forest, it's true that if you ask a smallholder to squeeze 20% of his land for forest, he won't necessarily be happy. But if we look at the bigger picture, when large companies like IOI or Sime Darby and you name them are working with the smallholders, you could look at your landscape and decide where you put the natural forest. It's something that everybody, all the shareholders need to share, of course. And this means that some smallholder may end up with their plot completely covered with forest because it's a key habitat for wildlife or a key corridor for wildlife, while some other smallholders may plant palms everywhere. At the end of the day, we have to have a mechanism that is fair to everyone. We won't solve all these issues if we keep looking at our own small boundaries. So this is the thing. We need to have a much wider approach, what we call a landscape approach.
Thank you so much, Marc. It's very interesting what you talked about, conceptualizing the boundaries. And in this aspect, I think I'd like to bring the conversation to Dr. Yatela in her work with Yayasan Sime Darby. Dr. Yatela, Yayasan Sime Darby is the philanthropic arm of the three Sime Darby companies, i.e. Sime Darby Berhad, Sime Darby Plantation Berhad, and Sime Darby Property Berhad. And I understand that Yayasan Sime Darby focuses on 5 pillars of education, community, health, and environment, sports and arts, and culture. But today, I think basically our focus seems to be the environment. Doctor, can you share the work of Yayasan Sime Darby, particularly its projects undertaken towards the environment pillar in reference to the palm oil industry? And I think if you can connect this to Marc's talk about reconceptualizing boundaries and the partnerships that are involved in this.
Thank you, Alina. Now, under our environment pillar, we are committed to protecting and preserving the environment and conserving biodiversity, landscape, seascape. Vulnerable or endangered species are prioritized, as well as the preservation of forest reserves, marine parks. We also focus on conserving the rich biodiversity that Malaysia has to mitigate climate change. We also support world-class scientific research. I will expand a little bit with what we're doing with Congo Lions, of which Marc is part of, with an aim to translate results into action, while developing highly capable local scientists, researchers, and custodians. What I mean by custodians are the local communities. YSD also champions causes that encourage and empower communities to live sustainably by adopting green and sustainable practices in their lifestyle and own the nature around them. Now, we have planted more than 1.6 million trees in the last decade to mitigate climate change. The reforestation and rehabilitation of the orangutan habitat in northern Ulu Segama, now called the Bukit Piton Forest Reserve, restored heavily degraded forest areas by replanting 3 species critical for the endangered orangutan's habitat and food supply. Now, the Sime Darby planted tree, for the Ulu Segama, we partnered with the Sabah Forestry Department. The Sime Darby Planetary Program aims to establish an arboretum, a gene bank of endangered, rare, and threatened tree species for Malaysia to conserve these trees, and creating stepping stones for linkage to nearby forests while also increasing the biodiversity value in Sime Darby plantation estates. Now, this is actually trying to do and to achieve the objective of creating mosaics of forests within plantations, oil palm plantations, as what Dr. Marc was mentioning just now. Like, for example, in Jenta, we selected 3 large areas where we planted these ERT trees together with the canopy trees for them to survive. And in Perak, in Lion Hill, we are planting more on the endemic species to create stepping stones. And both these areas are actually very near to forest reserves. And so these would have the linkages, stepping stones, and what Dr. Marc was mentioning just now as well, within oil palm plantations. Now, we are also working to conserve ERT tree species through tropical rainforest living collections with TRCRC in Sabah, in Merisuli, Lahad Datu, as well as in Banun, in the Amanjaya Permanent Reserve Forest, Perak, where tree planting is also done to restore the critical forest linkages in the central forest line. Now, to create a landscape for orangutan-human coexistence, our support helps to retain and enrich orangutan habitat patches within oil palm plantations, which Dr. Marc was mentioning just now, and develop guidelines for best management practices to support sustainable palm oil production. That includes safe spaces for wild orangutans outside of protected areas. So Sime Darby is wishing to be a catalyst to invite other plantation companies as well to join us with these best management practices on how do we coexist with orangutans and how to actually create those patches of habitat within our plantations for them to live. Now, with Nestle, our support with Project Relief had restored riparian zones along the lower Kinabatangan River with the planting of trees to reduce pollutants and to achieve forest connectivity for wildlife preservation. We also collaboratively conduct a program to conserve and rehabilitate the Raja Musa Forest Reserve, prevent fires and haze, as well as reduce greenhouse gas emissions from peatlands. We're also embarking on a mangrove planting and conservation in areas critically affected by erosions in Perak. Now, through these endeavors, we also help to create economic activities as well as capacity building and employment opportunities for the surrounding local communities, which we find to be a lot B40, apart from directly involving them in these climate change mitigating initiatives to create a sense of ownership towards the sustainability of the projects for a sustainable future.
Thank you, Dr. Yatela. I've spoken with you at least 3 or 4 times. I'm still learning. Every time I talk to you, I learn something. And just in the last 7 minutes, I learned so much. So thank you. But what I love is hearing the words you use, custodians, you know, having the local community as custodians. I love the use of the term stepping stones, linkages within palm oil plantations. You assist plantations to create these patches. You share that information, the creation of gene banks. These are wonderful words, but more than that, for you, it's not just words, it's actualities, it's fact. I'd like to just tie us back to our topic. Would you be able to share how you see all this work, the conservation, the rehabilitation, the reforestation, restoration, creating of linkages, how do you see them as being effective towards the mitigation as well as adaptation as a climate response?
You're asking me again, Alina. You actually answered it when you were summarizing Dr. Marc's talk. Sustainable management of ecosystems actually curb greenhouse gas emissions and therefore contributes to mitigating climate change. And biodiversity and ecosystem services are very important to be preserved because they support people, agriculture and livelihoods to adapt to climate change through approaches, and it can help reduce vulnerability to climatic hazards like floods, droughts. Furthermore, such approaches also involve the resilience of ecosystems to climate change so that they can continue to deliver ecosystem services, supporting the provision of alternative livelihood options in the face of climate change. So it's for the betterment of all society going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Yatela. Thank you so much. It looks like we are at 1:42. Okay, Kala, do you think it's
Alina.
time for our audience to participate? So let's see, what questions do our audience have for our panelists?
Alina, we've got so many questions, from the panel.
Oh my goodness, go ahead.
It's going to be difficult in the next, but please don't worry. We will make sure that we get all the questions answered and it will be posted on the website. But for now, if you allow me, Alina, I'm going to start with Dato Lee. Dato Lee, there was already a question that was posted on our website when this gentleman registered. His name is Manfred Bora, and he wants to know, Dato Lee, how is FFB traceability from smallholders to independent mills and CPO to refineries handled so far in Malaysia? Dato Lee?
So that's a rather technical question. So I think of course, all this, at the moment, the effort is still directed at the refineries, and actually much less to the mills or the individual plantation. So what the major palm oil buyers from food manufacturing companies or food processing companies, what they are doing is they actually impose the requirement for traceability on the refineries that supply the palm oil to them. And admittedly, it is a very complicated process, especially when you're smallholders who sometimes for various reasons in fact they don't want to. They are more, of course, they are more emphasizing on profitability, and some of them actually tend to want to be secretive also. They are afraid that exposing themselves will somehow attract the attention of authorities who might ask them about their tax status or whatever. But on the whole, I think the effort is real and is gaining good progress. And also there are various protocol schemes that have been advocated or recommended by various international bodies to track this traceability, to track the sustainability performance of all the suppliers, including smallholders, and the traceability protocol.
Okay, thank you very much, Dato Lee. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to just move on. And this next question, Alina, are you going to take it, or would you like me to ask Juan the next question?
Yes, go ahead, Kala.
Okay. All right, Juan, this question is from Peter Benjamin, the CEO of United Malacca. He says, we understand Nestle is a RSPO member, and glad to hear Nestle's commitment to source sustainably produced palm oil. What is your opinion where RSPO members who are consumers or producers have no palm oil labels in their products? Don't you think this is counterproductive, Juan?
Thank you. I can also help you with the other questions because I was taking notes, so I can answer if you want all of them at once. You're totally right, Benjamin. Actually, Nestle has a clear policy of not making negative claims in general and no palm oil in particular. At the same time, and it connects a little bit what we were discussing earlier, there is a consumer reality in some parts of the world, namely in some countries in Europe, and sometimes it's quite challenging not to avoid this conversation. So, for instance, in Switzerland, I was reading that about 64% of consumers are actively looking for no palm oil products. So again, we don't engage into that as a rule. There can be specific situations in one or another market segment where this may happen. I don't say that I necessarily agree with that, but the reality is that, yeah, there is a topic out there. Maybe quickly, I saw Sharat asking on 2050 being very far away. Yeah, Sharat, you are totally right. Actually, our commitment, that's the ultimate objective. By 2025, we should have achieved 25% CO2 emissions and 50% by 2030. So clearly, it's much more demanding than the very far away 2050 might suggest. Also, I saw a couple of anonymous questions, one on carbon emissions transportation. Yes, indeed, we know that addressing CO2 is not solved only with one action. So it requires working at many levels. I can share that, for instance, our Chimbom factory will have a bio-waste facility treatment as from mid next year that will help to contribute on the processing of this waste from palm oil farms. We are working to have renewable energies in our factories, and we are also working to have basically a green car and trucks fleet. So that will take a little bit of time. And last, maybe on the advocacy efforts, I honestly think this needs to be driven by the palm oil industry, but you have in Nestle a very kind of reliable advocate to help you in that. I don't think that that can be done by us. You know, we are a user of palm oil, but we are very happy to engage with you as industry. Obviously, with Malaysia as a country is doing its own efforts, so we want to be part of the solution to this advocacy challenge. But the industry must lead. I think that covers mostly the palm oil related questions.
Thank you very much, Juan. You've been so proactive. Well done. Okay, so let's move on. Marc, this question is for you. And it says, it's anonymous. Although all palm plantations are able and already been studied for carbon sequestering or act as carbon sink, however, it is not as efficient, of course, compared to the forest. So saying all palm plantations are enough, are quite enough, is inappropriate since all palm plantations cannot support biodiversity. So, Marc?
Yeah, well, it really depends on what we compare here. If we compare the level of biodiversity in a natural forest, definitely it's much, much, much richer than in a palm oil plantation. Having said that, if you compare the level of biodiversity in a palm oil plantation with a perennial crop like wheat or soy, well, you have more biodiversity in the palm oil crop because the palms are there for 25 or 30 years.
Yeah.
So it's really a comparison. The problem with an industry like the palm oil industry is that when you cut the forest, you lose biodiversity, no matter what you do. Yep. So if we want to restore this biodiversity, as we discussed earlier, we just need to plant back trees because trees will always harbor more biodiversity than people's crops. This is a fact. So the idea, if we want to restore this biodiversity, if we want to fight climate change as well, is we plant trees.
Yes, I agree.
The forest. So to finish with biodiversity in general, if we look at the status of biodiversity in the world, we know that we are losing species right and left, orangutan, elephant, tiger, and so forth. Well, the thing is, we need, of course, to increase the size of the protected areas in the world, of protected forests in Malaysia, but we also need to improve management practices outside of protected areas. We need to find ways for people and wildlife to coexist outside of protected forests. If not, we're going to lose everything. Yep. So the key for tomorrow will be to really find ways to improve our practices and to minimize our impact outside of these protected areas.
Yeah. Thank you, Marc. And I think, you know, moving from there, the next question to Dr. Yatela is, I think, is just a continuation of what you just said, Marc. When we say, you know, start afforestation and all that, what trees, and this is coming from Joseph Tech, the CEO of IJM Plantations. He says, do we know and have any knowledge of what are the tree species best suited for the different site-specific specificness in plantation landscapes? And how best can we initiate mass collection and establish raising nurseries for the tree saplings? I think he's already talking about work by TRCRC. So Yatela, you've been doing a lot of afforestation at YSD. Do we know exactly what tree species we should be, focusing on in oil palm plantations? Thank you.
Okay, it depends on the objective. If the objective is actually to come up with an arboretum, which our objective was for Jenta in Pahang, we actually collected ERT trees to be planted, but you need to have, endemic trees that can be acting as canopy and can live easier when they are planted first. So they are the pioneer and canopy trees before the ERT trees come in for the planting of those arboretums. Now, for like in Pahang, in Lion Hill, we have the objective of creating, secondary linkages, stepping stones to the forest reserve. So we're looking at endemic trees in that area, and that's what TRCRC believes as well. Always plant trees endemic to the area in order to maintain and get the best biodiversity quality and outcomes from the planting of trees. So that would be what my answer now. Now for the collection of seeds, we work with a lot of partners. We work with TRCRC, we work with the local communities who also plant in their nurseries as well as we plant within our nurseries. So we have a lot of collaborations with people who can actually help us to secure those seeds for our nurseries as well.
Okay, thanks, Yatela. I think we are coming to the close, but Datuk Lee, I'm not going to let you go. One very last question to you, very simple one, and I think easy to answer. Malaysia has done so much it's from a gentleman called, I can't pronounce his name, Wan Chun Lo. Malaysia has done so much for sustainable palm oil. Why are the West still bullying us, Datuk Lee?
Well, bullying is a subjective word, so I shouldn't comment on that. But maybe I give one example that is that's reflected in a question somewhere. So someone asked a question: Why do we still see this haze or that occurs every now, not every now and then, but in every other some years when weather is dry. So, and then automatically that question implies that oil palm is responsible for it. So I would say that there's a lot of prejudice in that when you assume that there's a burning and tree and therefore palm oil plantations or oil palm growers is responsible for it. So in today's work environment, actually, or for a long time already, actually the palm oil players have found alternative ways of clearing land or replanting oil palms, and that's completely zero burning. So and also the risk of being caught with burning is so strong that there simply makes no economic sense or no operational sense for people to take the risk for any to do that. So whatever, and when we talk about this, the cost of burning, countries like Russia, Australia, they suffer this kind of big burning in their forests or trees by sometimes millions of hectares. But nobody point finger to say that, hey, this is caused by oil palm or soybean or whatever. So I think so going back to your question is whatever we want to allege or want to state, I think we must all be very sensible about it. We must base all the accusations or all the statements must be based on science, and then we can have a very constructive debate. If one resorts to sensationalization and just mere accusations, then it's very difficult to have a good debate and to solve the underlying problem.
Thank you, Datuk Lee. I think maybe it's also because we are successful and therefore we are under scrutiny and people are forever looking at us. So let's continue our competitive edge. We are a leading oils and fats producer. And like Alina said at her opening speech, we have so many good attributes coming from oil palms. So let's transform, the bullying can be looked at it positively. Let's transform our industry, make sure that, we do it, sustainably. Just like the video, it's not about the oil, it's about the practice. Alina, over to you.
Okay, so yes, thanks. Great conversation. And what I've learned from the conversation of the past hour is the sort of questions that we can ask ourselves and our companies. So we can begin with, how does our actions or activity impact or depend on the climate or natural capital? And how material is this impact or dependency? Of course, your stakeholders will determine this. What is our carbon footprint from this activity? And if you want to calculate carbon footprint in the palm oil industry, RSPO has the palm GHG calculator, which you could use to help them. And then you got to identify where in the business's value chain is a response required. For example, like Juan shared, he identified where it is in the supply chain. And then finally, what is the appropriate response? So we have to ask these questions of our companies and of ourselves. And our panelists have offered a menu from which you can take away. And these are ranging between mitigation and adaptation responses. When you talk about mitigation, it covers actions that reduce emission sources or enhance carbon sinks. Like Dato Lee's Climate Change Action Initiative, Juan's Nestle's Net Zero by 2050 with their traceability tools, their Project Relief, Dr. Yatela talking about forest conservation and how this addresses reduction of carbon emission. This falls under mitigations. You talk about adaptation. Adaptation covers adjusting the way we operate to either moderate the harm or take advantage of opportunities. So one method is natural capital asset maintenance. I talk about, if we're talking about the palm oil industry, it's biodiversity. Whether it's small scale or large scale, it provides the ecosystem support and it benefits producers. Dr. Marc has shared his perspective on this. Dr. Yatela also illustrated protection of local and rural communities to include them in this. And another important adaptation measure, which was shared by Datuk Lee, is good agricultural practices. And the objective, of course, is better yields and more productivity with less dependence on natural capital. So in other words, financial value as well as benefit to the environment. And between the mitigation and the adaptation, there's that center point. The center point. And, in some academic literature, they call it an adaptation for ecosystems. That's so fancy, but I just consider it center point. But it's a place where we can all begin straight away. So for example, it's like reducing threats to the ecosystem, like cyclical waste management and water and energy conservation. In the context of palm oil, basically as simple as stop deforestation, no new planting on peats. And of course, continuing research by scientists and technologists for better yields, I think is so important. Four other important aspects were highlighted, even by Datuk Ravi. One is partnerships. I think we've all talked about that. Second is communication and engagement, because the story has to be told. Third, the circular or regenerative economy mindset that Datuk Lee mentioned, that Datuk Ravi mentioned as well. And finally, the mindset. What is clearly demonstrated by our panelists is a both and attitude. There's no trade-offs involved. Yeah, for the panelists, it's we can do. Malaysia boleh, we can do it. So with that, I would like to thank our keynote speaker, Datuk Ravi Muthayah, our panelists, Mr. Juan Aranols, Datuk Yeow, Chor, Dr. Marc Ancrenaz, and Dr. Yatela Zainal for their time and their generosity in sharing their knowledge and experience in this important topic. I also would like to thank Dr. Kalanithi and Dr. Leong Yuen Yen from CGM. Finally, I would like to thank you, our audience, for investing your time with us, and hope that you have enjoyed our session together and found something valuable to take away with you. We've had many questions and Kala has promised that she will answer. It will be posted on the CGM website in the blog. For those who have not already done so, CGM is free to individual members, so please join us for our newsletters and events. With that, I wish everyone a very good day and stay well and positive.
Thank you very much, Alina.
Bye.
Thank you very much, everybody. could the panelists just stay behind? We'll take a group photograph.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone. Dato, Juan, Marc, Yatela, just stick back for a sec.
Okay, everyone ready for a picture?
Yep.
Yes.
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 3, 2, 1. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations to Kala,
Thank
to
you,
Alina.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Congratulations. It was a really interactive session. I learned a lot as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you all. And I hope to
Yeah,
meet
thanks,
everyone
guys.
soon.
Soon. And yeah, Alina, they've lifted the
MCO.
MCO.
Yes.
So we can
We'll
have
send an email.
Yes, we will send an email for your dates. We won't
Yes.
do that now, but we will send an email and get everyone's, and then we can see each and every one of us, and we can talk about this webinar and what you thought, a quick post-mortem, and then maybe for some solutions, I think we can work on it together, yeah?
Always good.
Thank
Always
you.
good.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
That's been very insightful and very well managed. Bye.
Yes, I
Thank you very
agree. Thank you.
To you, all of you.
Thank you.
So what do you think? I'm tired. I'm
People
exhausted.
gone, Alina.
We still have 40 attendees on the.
Yeah, people are still there. Can they hear us?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh no. So shall we wait for the for them to leave?
You can just log off, yeah.
We can.
That's for people to Harish Rajkumar. Good work to all. Okay. Thank you,
I hope everyone enjoyed it.
as much as we did. Huh?
Yeah.
Kudos, Joseph Tech. Okay, thank you for the discussion. All right. No, we will post to everyone. Harish Rajkumar. Okay, he's put up his, I think they can hear so clearly. Never mind.
Joseph was there as well. Joseph too.
Yes, Joseph sent, I want to know what species to plant, which is
Yeah.
a very valid question, I think. You know, we go say, oh, we're going to A for us, you know, what is,
Yeah.
you know, symbiotic with oil palm or what, right?
Yeah, there's so much. There's so much material to talk about under this. Yeah, this is so much.
Yeah. So have they gone?
No, we have 27.
27 still. Sunita, how do I get these questions to?
I will get them to you.
Okay, perfect. And then Juan, I think he's answered most of it. There was some.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to close off this
Shall we
webinar.
close it off and then maybe we can meet on a separate Zoom?
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Nice.
Bye. Bye.